7 degrees now in the provincial capital. Well, the case of local blogger Charles Leblanc was threatening to become a saga. The Attorney General told Fredericton police its chances of making a charge of criminal libel stick against Leblanc are next to zero. Several courts elsewhere have declared that charge unconstitutional. Police Chief MacKnight says he'll ask for an outside review of what happened, and we'll talk to the chief about that in just a moment. He's here in the studio with me now. Charles Leblanc thinks a good place to start would be to return his stuff, the computer equipment police took from him in that raid on his apartment last January.
They seized the monitor, they seized the keyboard, the speakers, the hard drive. There was also some codes on the wall, the modem. Everything that made my blog or my pictures go online was eliminated. As far as I know, it's at the police station. There's about 200,000 pictures in there, and that would be nice to have. I was going to have those pictures and give it to the provincial archives. For 100 years from now, they would have a good chuckle of all my videos with the mayor and everything. So it'd be nice to have. All I could say is a big misjustice that was done in this case, and we must make sure that it never happened to me again. I didn't really jump with great joy. I'm being very, very cautious, and I learned that I've been involved in this for a long time, that you don't jump the gun, you just wait take a deep breath and just watch the system works, and then we just take it from there.
Some of blogger Charles Leblanc's thoughts yesterday on having charges dropped against him and the prospect of getting his property back from Fredericton police. Chief MacKnight released a statement late yesterday afternoon welcoming an outside review of what happened. And Chief MacKnight is in our studio this morning. Good morning. Thanks very much for coming in. Nice to have you here.
Good morning, Terry.
Okay, let's start at the beginning here. What oversight did you, as chief, provide in the days and hours leading up to the raid on Leblanc's apartment?
Well, we had an active file that was being investigated, and that followed the same course that any other file would. There were investigators that were assigned to it, and they carried on their work as they ordinarily would. I mean, the oversight with respect to that file is no different than it is with any other file.
Given the profile of this particular case and a history with Mr. Leblanc, did the investigating officers come to you and say, we're going to go to Mr. Leblanc's apartment and we're going to seize his computer gear on a charge of defamation?
Yes, I was aware of everything that was going on with the investigation.
And you approved that action?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
What investigation did you do to determine the validity and the constitutionality of Section 301?
Yeah, our investigators, I think it's important for people to understand that the role of the police is different than the role of the Crown, which is and also different from the role of the Attorney General. While there are differing views on the validity of that section of the criminal code, that law remains in force in the province of New Brunswick. It has not been repealed. I know that there are investigations in other parts of the country under that section, and we were certainly aware that it was a section of the criminal code that was still in place and still in play as far as that goes.
But you were aware that its unconstitutionality had been raised?
At the time that the investigation was going on, I wasn't aware that there were jurisdictions that had said that it was that they found, lower courts had found it to be unconstitutional. And even if I was aware of that, our investigators would have continued to do what they ordinarily do: is they would investigate, they would consult with the Crown when necessary, And as a part of this investigation, as you probably know, there was well, you've just made reference to it, there was a warrant executed, and the process for obtaining a search warrant is that we go to the Crown. There are documents that we prepare and information to obtain a search warrant that articulates the criminal offense that we're investigating and what our grounds to believe that offense has been committed are, and why we believe there is evidence in a certain place that may help to establish that offense. That information was presented to the Crown, not for the purpose of them approving a charge, because this is very early on.
Right.
So we had consulted with the Crown, that information was taken to them, and then that information ultimately went to a judge, and at that point the Crown and the judge approved the search warrant to continue the investigation. So, and then of course it's after that complete investigative report is presented to the Crown with recommendations for charges. That is the way that the system works, and that's the way that it worked in this case. And then ultimately the Crown, as you know, as they do in any case, they determine whether or not they'll support it going forward, and that's what happened here. And so,
but the issue was Charles Leblanc, according to the investigation, Charles Leblanc had defamed one of your officers,
right,
a member of the Fredericton police force.
That's correct, yes.
So how typical is it that 6 or 7 officers will show up with a criminal charge for someone who's defamed someone?
You're referring to when the warrant was executed?
Right.
Well, that's absolutely typical of any time that a warrant is executed. There were a number of police officers, there were members of the technical crimes unit with the RCMP, and we work together on these sorts of things, and they help with determining what items should be seized when a warrant is executed. So it's very typical that number of officers would be there. That is just standard procedure for any case.
Because, you know, the optics, let's deal with the general optics here. Mr. LeBlanc, through his blog, has criticized the Fredericton Police Department, you at times, certain officers at times. So it looks as if you had a grudge to settle with Mr. LeBlanc, and that's what happened.
Well, first of all, I would say that's not what happened. I want to make it very clear. I know there are people who have speculated that there is perhaps personal animosity between police officers and Mr. LeBlanc, and I can tell you that I have absolutely no personal animosity whatsoever with Mr. LeBlanc. Members of our department have had I guess a long-standing relationship with Mr. LeBlanc, and while over the last year and a half or so there were instances where that relationship involved him being charged for a traffic offense or whatever it was, I want to make sure that it's clear to people that our police officers conduct themselves in a highly professional and ethical manner.
Yeah, right.
I have no reason to believe whatsoever that any officer did anything other than conduct themselves professionally with respect to Mr. LeBlanc. I would also agree that the optics are not good, and optics are something that we are concerned about, but they cannot dictate our actions. We're always primarily concerned, of course, because the Fredericton Police Force is an ethical organization, with doing the right thing. I think that our officers believed that they were doing the right thing throughout this. They followed the policies and procedures.
Bullshit.
Did you still believe you were doing the right thing when the Canadian Civil Liberties Association came out and said, hey, hold on a second here, don't you know that charge has been declared unconstitutional in several jurisdictions? Did you think you were doing the right thing when a group of UMB law professors came out and said, hold on a second, this isn't right?
Yeah, I still believe that we are doing the right thing, and that we are following what our role is in the justice system, and that is to investigate and present matters to the Crown. The Civil Liberties Association, I respect their role in Canadian society in presenting their views, and that dialogue about that particular section of the criminal code is a very valid dialogue that should be carried on within the public should be, and ultimately the decisions around the validity of a section of the criminal code are dealt with by the courts and ultimately the parliamentarians if there is a move to repeal a particular law that perhaps society has moved in a different direction.
Sure. Let me ask you this. Why is it that you get to determine who does the outside investigation? Why is it that you are going to determine the parameters of that investigation? Especially considering,
Sure,
as you say, you were the person providing oversight when this particular sequence of events unfolded. I mean, you could be found to have behaved improperly. So why are you getting to determine what the investigation looks at?
Well, the independent review is something that is going to be, at this point, is something that's going to be driven by me for the welfare of the organization and to make sure that we are acting properly to make sure that we do the right thing. So I am going to be the person who does the work as far as finding who can do this. But of course, there has to be checks and balances involved in that. The person who ultimately accepts to do this sort of a review has to be someone that I am confident that the community would see as independent enough that they are going to do an appropriate review and they are going to say whatever they need to say. So, whatever I do, you can rest assured that I will work with my colleagues, with the city. We'll make sure that we can find someone that I think people will accept. If people don't accept that the person is independent, then that would affect people's perception about whether the recommendations are valid, whether the review is appropriate.
But if
I'll make sure that that's done.
An independent person is one thing, but telling the independent person where they can look or what they can investigate, what they should investigate, could affect the outcome of the investigation, could it not?
Well, absolutely, and that's why I think that what you'll see is that terms of reference will be wide enough that I think that any ordinary person would be able to say that review will cover everything that it needs to cover. And that's the objective.
Back to optics, though. The optics of you making the decision, the determination who will do the review and what the terms of reference are, some people would consider the optics not being good there.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't dispute that. But I think that it will be our actions and it will be who we determine should be doing the review in the end that will determine whether or not people think that it's appropriate. And again, our actions will determine whether or not the review is credible. So I don't have any problem. I'll be talking to a number of people about what they think the right where's the right place for us to go to find a person who can do that review.
Why do you still have Charles Leblanc's computer?
Well, once the investigation is formally closed, and I can tell you that will happen fairly quickly. I've reviewed the decision from the Office of Public Prosecutions. I've got no dispute with what they say. I think it's a reasonable decision based on what they've said, and so the file will be formally concluded, and that will happen very shortly. And the same as in any other case, at that point, any property that we have will be returned to the person.
And information taken from the computer destroyed or kept?
Well, all of the property that we have and all of the evidence remains a part of the file, but there's no charges, and so our files stay within our system. Yes.
So the information that you've mined from the hard drive stays in your possession.
The information that we have, that we were authorized to have from the warrant, stays with the file, and then all of the property goes back to Mr. Leblanc. But again,
even though that charge was deemed unconstitutional in other jurisdictions, you're still able to keep that information.
What we have gained from our investigation, the information that we have gained is part of the file. There's no criminal charge in this case, right? So there's nothing happening with that.
Appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome.
That's Fredericton Police Chief Barry MacKnight. Any thoughts, please get in touch. info@fredericton.cbc.ca. You can also talk to me on Twitter. My address is @SEGUINCBC. It's 7:31. It's time for the news. Here's Jennifer Sweet.
A family of 4 is home